A former aerospace engineer named Bob Wood had a very distinguished career working for some of the giants of the industry. From 1968 to 1970, he worked on a project for McDonnell Douglas to determine whether or not UFOs were real. One of his first hires for the study was a nuclear physicist at McDonnell Douglas from the University of Chicago, whose staff and faculty has included 99 Nobel laureates and 53 Rhodes Scholars, and whose alumni include Carl Sagan, J. Allen Hynek, and former President Barack Obama. His name was Stanton Friedman. Friedman had a keen interest in UFO phenomena, and the group concluded after an 18-month study that UFOs were a genuine phenomenon and further study was justified. Dr. Wood was scheduled to present their findings to Congress, but knowing this would cast a shadow over his career, declined the invitation to do so. Undeterred, Friedman was eager to discuss their findings with the public, and did so for civilian groups as well as scientific gatherings. So passionate was he about the subject, he left McDonnell Douglas to embark on a career as a full-time UFO investigator. Somewhat improbably, it wasn't until 1978 that Friedman became aware of what would become known as the Roswell incident, after a television producer named Bill Allen told him about the experience of a ham radio buddy of his named Jesse Marcel. Learning that Marcel had handled the wreckage and worked in Army intelligence, Friedman was ready to hear his story. Marcel was equally eager to tell of what he had held in his hands and examined carefully, insisting the materials were like nothing he had ever seen before, and were seemingly impervious to all manner of force exerted on them. Marcel made it clear he was ordered not to speak of any of it during the press conference in Ramey's office, and was told to hold fast to the story of a downed observation balloon. But unbeknownst to anyone, and before bringing the material back to the base from the crash site, he took that side trip home where he showed what he had gathered to his wife and young son Jesse Jr. The younger Marcel, years later, recalled seeing the wreckage in the back seat and trunk, as well as the various tests they tried on the pieces to try to figure out what his father was in possession of. Of particular interest was a small I-beam that displayed some sort of unidentifiable writing that he and his father described as resembling hieroglyphics. The senior Marcel, in his capacity as head of intelligence, was quite familiar with some of the more exotic aircraft the military was testing, as well as the balloons that were being employed for various reasons, and that what he had come across was nothing he had ever encountered previously. Upon his retirement, Colonel Thomas DuBose, who was present with Ramey and Marcel at the weather balloon unveiling, definitively said the belief they had positively identified what had landed in Brazel's field was a lie, and nothing more than a cover story. He further explained his orders came directly from General Clements McMullen of the Strategic Air Command in Washington, and they were to discourage the press from pursuing any other angle, to send some of the wreckage to Washington, and not to, under any circumstances, speak of it with anyone, including General Ramey. For his part, Friedman remained in a single-minded pursuit of the truth, and determined to expose what he had become certain was a cover-up, interviewing witnesses, speaking to the press, and doing talks for various groups. For him, it was amounting to a crusade. This continued through the 1980s until 1993, when an unanticipated statement about the Roswell cover-up came from an unexpected source, the United States military. They essentially conceded that Friedman was onto something, and indeed a cover-up was set into motion, but their admission was not what everyone, especially Friedman, anticipated or hoped for. It began when Congressman Stephen Schiff from New Mexico had launched an inquiry into the Roswell incident, and the Air Force was obliged to disclose any documents on it they might have in their possession. In 1995, the Air Force released a document of their findings titled The Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. In it, they conceded the material found by Marcel and Brazel wasn't from a weather balloon, but rather tied to a top-secret program called Project Mogul. Mogul was a covert surveillance program where balloons with acoustic sensors were launched to high altitudes to listen for Russian atomic bomb tests, and further that the men involved in the recovery and evaluations of the wreckage were not aware of this program, nor had they been trained to identify the materials used. It was further concluded that no presence of a UFO was determined by this latest investigation, but this explanation didn't satisfy those who were convinced something more had taken place in 1947. The prevailing thought was they did admit they had lied to the public back then, so I believe they were telling the truth now. And more importantly, how could investigators and the public access the records from the incident? These questions were addressed in another 1997 Air Force report, in which they admitted that all records from 1946 to 1949 had been destroyed. No one could trace whom or what agency had given the order to do so. In that 1997 document, the Roswell report, Case Closed, Project Mogul is explained in greater detail, and it went to great lengths to discredit much of the witness testimony. As far as the alien bodies, they were explained as crash test dummies being used in high-altitude parachute tests. The code name for the tests was Operation High Dive, and the dummies were being dropped from varying heights to determine which altitude might be survivable for humans. The dummies were said to be 6 feet tall, which contradicts the 3 to 4 foot tall beings witnesses saw, but that was explained away by saying some had been burned, thereby reducing their overall height, and others damaged, which addressed the bizarre features that had been reported. The issue with these explanations is that Operation High Jump and the use of dummies did not begin until 1953. The lapse in chronology was blamed on locals not being able to keep track of years and dates, and in their words, consolidating them. To prove their point further, they made reference to a witness that confirmed seeing the plastic bodies, 55-year-old Gerald Anderson, who was 5 years old at the time of the incident. Optically, it certainly looked like a case of facts being fashioned to fit a theory. In one of the iconic photos of the balloon wreckage, Ramey is holding a memo in his right hand, which would become a source of great interest to ufologists and to many the smoking gun of the Roswell incident. While blurry in the original photo, advancements in photo forensics have made it possible to enhance and better define what was typed on the paper. But the analysis would be dependent on the existence of the original negatives, which Stanton Friedman would discover still existed. So Friedman purchased them in order to have them placed under examination. The result was several words being deemed to be clearly definable. The memo contained words like disc, victim, urgent, wreck, as well as the name of Air Force General Hoyt Vandenberg. Of particular interest was the phrases misstate meaning of story and next send out PR of weather balloons would fare better. The contents of the memo would seem to imply a cover-up was underway. In 1980, Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz co-authored a book, The Roswell Incident, and interest in the event was rekindled with TV shows like In Search of and Unsolved Mysteries dedicating entire episodes to it. Fortunately, many witnesses were able to divulge their first-hand observations and experiences during the alleged crash. Unfortunately, many of them have since passed on, leaving second- or third-hand accounts as corroboration of their stories. The story of Melvin Brown, who as an Army military man guarded parts of the wreckage and said he was able to catch a glimpse of the bodies, was related through his daughter Beverly after her father's death. Further adding skepticism to the story is the fact that he was actually a mess sergeant at the base. Did they employ an all-hands approach to guarding the purported wreckage? Perhaps so. And then there is the quandary that memories are often faulty in the best of circumstances, and people will add or forget details as time passes, sometimes quite innocently. As an example, Loretta Proctor, wife of rancher Floyd Proctor, said she saw the debris that wouldn't burn, which is contrary to what she said years earlier, that at that time she had seen no debris. Was she just keeping tight-lipped about it, as many back then were instructed? Certainly a possibility. Some of Jesse Marcel Sr.'s accomplishments have been embellished, including some commendations, being a pilot with 5 kills, and in one particularly ludicrous claim that he actually flew the UFO to Roswell Airfield. What we do know is he advanced through the ranks from lieutenant to ultimately a major as an intelligence officer, and was an integral participant in the testing of nuclear weapons after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But in 2020, his diary was found by his grandchildren, in which he recorded his experiences in the military. The problem is, the language and writing style seemed to evolve after the Roswell incident into some type of code. Therefore, speculation exists that he never wrote the diary and that the actual author remains unknown. In terms of why years passed before he revealed the truth of what had occurred on the In Search of Roswell episode, he's quoted thusly:
"They wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So, all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who told the newspapers, the newsmen, what it was, and to forget about it. It is nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, we both knew differently."
In 2000, Walter Haut gave sworn testimony of the presence of alien craft and alien bodies, as well as a cover-up, in a wide-ranging document that was to be released after his death, which occurred in 2005. But his memory of things was imprecise, to be kind. It turned out that the signed affidavit was actually an interview given to Tom Carey and Donald Schmidt, who reproduced it in their 2007 book, Witness to Roswell. Schmidt and the Haut family agreed to honor his wishes and not release this document until after Haut's death. Nonetheless, when he was alive, Haut revealed most, if not all, of what's in that book, so it's difficult to say anything contained within it has been intentionally altered, which makes his story intriguing. But perhaps the most disconcerting testimony is that of mortician Glenn Dennis, the man who said the Air Force was looking for child-sized coffins and threatened his life if he spoke of it. He claimed to authors Carey and Schmidt in their book that he was friends with a nurse at the base who over lunch one day drew him a picture of an alien body who later wound up dead, an event that the Air Force contends never happened. The authors noted, after questioning him about it, that he revealed to them, "I gave you a phony name because I promised her that I would never reveal it to anyone." Dennis asserted that he was at the hospital on July 7, 1947, and saw Naomi Maria Self, a nurse, run from a room with a cloth over her mouth. Self told him that she had walked in on the autopsy of 3 mangled black little bodies, and the odor was so horrible that the autopsies were moved elsewhere on the base. This was the false name he gave to Carey and Schmidt. The Air Force suggests that Dennis may have been referring to a nurse named Eileen May Fanton, who matched his physical description of the fictional Self, and was one of 5 nurses assigned to the Roswell Hospital in 1947. The Air Force adds that Dennis may have conflated his memories of Self and Fanton with a 1956 aircraft accident that killed 11 crewmen. The badly burned remains were brought to the Roswell Base Hospital, the odor being so bad that the remains were moved to a refrigerated room at the base commissary. 3 of those bodies were autopsied elsewhere. Dennis, along with Haut, went on to co-found the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell. So the conflict rages between ufologists, the scientific community, and the military-industrial complex. Are we in possession of alien bodies, advanced technology, and spacecraft that's worth protecting and shielding from the rest of the world? Or did people just lose their damn minds? Like it or not, the lack of disclosure in the interest of national security will always be the bugaboo that will keep certain doors closed. And if you think building 1,000 skiffs and having hundreds of congressional hearings to reveal above secret classified information will finally give us the answers, you have a better chance of a spacecraft landing in your backyard.